A lifetime of hard work, children laughing in the kitchen, family photos on a restaurant wall, a legacy that lives on. It all comes from the power of a conversation, like the one Cody Hall had with First Horizon Bank about taking over his father's Charleston-based restaurant business. Now the table is set for a whole new generation. First Horizon Bank. Let's find a way. Go to firsthorizon.com/Tommy. First Horizon Bank, member FDIC.
It doesn't matter what side your beliefs lie, there's no doubt that this country has built a fascinating political machine. We have all seen the wild money being spent on campaigns, especially here in Georgia. Do you ever wonder how that money is spent or who is leading the strategy behind said campaigns? So do we. Today we are interviewing Cody Hall, who is the communications manager for Governor Kemp's most recent and incredibly successful campaign. We also have Ben Burnett from the Ben Burnett Show aboard to keep us on our toes and add his own unique take on the stake of Republican politics. All that and more today on the Marketing Madmen podcast.
They say marketing is a madman's game. So now we turn it over to the Marketing Madmen with Nick Constantino and Trip Job.
Happy Saturday, Trip Job and Nick Constantino with the Marketing Madmen here on Extra 106.3. And, we are on a political conservative talk radio show. Yeah, and it kind of reminds me that, it used to be that luckily that only came up a couple of months, every 2 years or every 4 years. But God, the last, I'm going to say 4 or 5 years, it seems like politics, campaigning, the marketing of it, it's nonstop.
That it is.
And, I think
for better or for worse.
For better or for worse. But so what does that mean? What does that mean for, businesses? What does it mean for, how we engage it in our daily lives?
Yeah.
And I think, it's something let's spend a little bit of time talking about today.
Yeah, for sure. And luckily, because it's not my core competency, look, I could tell you all about how it affects a radio station or a TV station and how the campaigns work and how much money is put in here, how the switch been digital. But luckily, we are going to also get to talk to somebody. In segment 2, I was lucky enough to sit in on the Ben Burnett Show, our buddy Ben Burnett on this station Sundays at noon. And we had a dual interview with Mr. Cody Hall, who was Kemp's comms manager, communications manager for the entire campaign. So he won handily. Yeah. He is potentially a front runner to be president or to run for president. So what better way to hear this than from the guy who organized and ran that campaign? So we're going to cut up a part of that interview, play that back. We learned some really cool stuff there. Ben was very helpful. He's a little upset that his show is far, far worse than ours in the ratings. But we'll confront that animal when it comes. Yeah. But one of the biggest things that's changed, and it's been over the past 20 or so years, was the super PACs. Yeah. And from an advertising standpoint, the biggest difference is when you come in as a state candidate in your own campaign, you are automatically given priority as to where you can run on television and radio. Okay, so for example, I have a $100 spot for John's Plumbing. Well, that political campaign is allowed to come in at that rate, is the absolute lowest rate on the station that they're allowed to come in, and they have priority over anybody else.
Wow.
So that's the way. Super PACs can do whatever they want, spend wherever they want, be wherever they want. There's no declaration. They don't have to say who's giving the money in. Yeah. They can come in with any cause, any advocacy. They don't have to say the person's name. They can be negative. That is what has completely changed the nature of the game.
I think that's part of what many people don't enjoy about the marketing and advertising of politics.
Yeah, and the irony is the ones that enjoy it the most are the ones that are already most likely to pick their candidate. So it really doesn't make sense. And I've asked for percentages, like what is that attack at? What does it sway perception? And it's amazing how small the percentages that they sway is. And one of the things that we're going to talk about with Cody, they're starting to revert more to the ground game. And the ground game could be TV, but the ground game is maybe you're geo-targeting certain areas with a message that might be different than the overall mass blast.
Right. Well, and I think that's, so growing up in my business career, being in the paper and forest products and print industry, we used to talk about it, that there were certain times, every 4 years usually, where there was the political bounce from a print perspective, whether it's, all the letters that went out, whether it was the yard signs, you name it. But that was something that definitely happened every 4 years. Well, now you're seeing more and more of that all the time, which is still good for that industry. But it also kind of points to, for me, don't assume that traditional patterns are always going to, keep going.
Well,
look at ways to find opportunities, because what you're, I think, going to get out of this is they're always looking to get their message out.
Yeah, that's it. And that it is in their favor to be talked about 365 days a year. Yeah. Just like the NFL has done a great job of, once the Super Bowl ends, you go to the draft, you go to the signing period. Like they've mapped this out. Baseball too. All these sports want to make sure they're topical all year round. Don't think for a second that Tom Brady didn't choose to retire again during the week of Pro Bowl when nobody on earth is watching these idiots play dodgeball. Are you kidding me?
Right.
You're going to watch grown men play dodgeball in that call out of Pro Bowl? Come on, are you freaking kidding me? Brady made that announcement because the NFL knew, no one's going to talk about us. This is stupid. What are we going to do? So that's when Brady made that announcement. So politics is no different. There's no off season. They have to remain topical. And, it is true. The primaries are more covered. But at the same time, let's not forget Fox News and CNN, how they have to make everything a bigger spectacle than it is. I mean, you're watching the election night coverage, and like Kemp might be ahead by 65%. They'll pick the 2 counties that he's down and be like, look how close the race is. And it's just it is built on that 24/7 news cycle that has really screwed a lot of this up. And I think the fatigue settles in, and I think it also shows, as an advertiser, you have to be more cognizant of your marketing channels around there, because the last thing you want to do is be run behind a really bad attack ad in those time periods, and then all of a sudden be like, you're perceived as this negative connotation. So you got to be careful.
And is there anything you can do in that regard?
The answer is no, because you don't want to come off marketing, because actually listenership tends to be higher in those time periods. But you can always change your message of maybe you pull back your message and you don't make it so you just make it very positive and uplifting, or back to the old school brand, right? All about your brand. Take attention off that and talk about brand and what you've done to serve your community. I think that's a good strategy there.
Yeah, purpose ads, and we've seen it. We around the Super Bowl we had show when we focused on some of the trends in ads, and there have been a few over times that are just purpose-driven ads. WeatherTech is one I don't think we talked about on that show, but they're like 10 years now, and it started as product, and it started as Made in America, and then they've really turned to money and things they give back to the community. So that's a great example of sometimes ways you can steer your message if you're getting into that time where things are maybe getting a little volatile.
Yeah, and I think I would double down on that. That's a great message. And one of the things I really think, people are starting to rely more and more on local governments. I think as unfortunately the negativity towards the political party system and the federal government, you rely more on your local community. And I think, focusing on, Kemp as a governor really hit the road hard and showed up in a lot of places. Right. And you saw how important that was. People care about their city council members. And that's how we know Ben Burnett was an Alpharetta city council member. So I think that message of locality and community is even more important as people kind of shy away from the national stuff.
Yeah. You hit on it before, and maybe we'll actually get the answer in the next segment, but, about is someone going to run for the next office? So, I think that's another thing that's back to the point of there is no off season anymore.
Yep.
I think, the candidates are starting to use the various means available to them to tease, and get, kind of get a sense. It's not the year of the election anymore. They're starting to do it a year in advance and trying to tease and understand what's going to go on, and could they be a candidate for that next office up?
Yeah, and I think that's posturing, and I think because now we work on a conservative talk station, you're going to know more about what's going on than the masses are going to. And I think, again, Fox News is going to accentuate and make their own wild predictions because they want to keep their people engaged, so CNN. Right. But yeah, I think that the strategy involved is more holistic now as to, hey, you can only say these things on your governor race because your inclinations and what you want higher. So I do think that has to do with it. I think, Kemp is very clever in how when he chooses to show his ultra-conservatism and when he doesn't, because if you're going to run for president, that can't be the platform you run on. It's been shown numerous times. So I think that you also have a lot larger of a staff of strategists around you now than you ever did before, right? It used to be one guy who was your strategist. Now you got an HR person. You have damage control. One of the things Cody said was, on any political campaign, you spend more time in damage control than anything else, especially with a guy like Kemp who will answer questions and is off the cuff, and he might rip up what he has in front of him and just throw it out and talk what he wants to talk about. You're always on damage control. And not the same damage control like the world is ending, but like if you say one wrong thing and now you've pissed off one group of people, what is going to be your response? It has to be almost immediate.
Right.
So it's. I hope you guys enjoy it. It's an interesting interview. I do think. I think personally, Governor Kemp's been here a couple of times. I think he ran a really good campaign. I think Stacey Abrams was qualified to do well, and she did not do well at all. I think it was interesting to see what happened with Herschel and what Kemp took away from Herschel and what Kemp won, even though they were on the same card, how there were split tickets going on. And it also shows you what the downfall of political campaigns are and what went wrong with the Herschel campaign. So it was
really learning.
promotion.
I mean, the lessons I take away is just from, and they have more money to put into research than probably most companies combined.
It's old research, though, dude. By the time you vet it through the system and fact check it, you're talking it's 2 years old. Things change so fast now that you have research, but it's not live real-time research because you're paying somebody to do it. And do you want to really piss off the guy, or do you want to show him how great he's doing? And then you're only going after areas where you know he does well. So I think that's one of the problems. I think they didn't do enough research on the national side, which is why Georgia has almost gone blue, because they were targeting only the people they wanted to. Right? Like if you're up in Milton, it's going to be a completely different market than Georgia and then Atlanta as a blue area.
That's flawed research versus doing research.
Yeah, and unfortunately, everyone's going to sell you research where they think makes you feel the best, which they want to buy.
Yeah.
Before we go to break, the only thing I want to say is do me a favor. Whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, independent, libertarian, I tend to lead libertarian, listen to things. Don't make your bias about what you're hearing because it's one party or the other. You deserve, and this country deserves, for you to learn about all the parties and all the different things going on, because that's the only time you're going to make educated decisions. Don't listen to us. Hear what we say. Use it, inform it to make your own decisions on things, please.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've kind of always had a philosophy. Unfortunately, the elections themselves are a binary choice. You can pick one or the other.
I wish we could change that.
Right. But then after that, life isn't binary. Whoever the candidates are, whoever's in the various offices, they have to work to make choices that hopefully work for as many of us as possible. So it's not binary, and our thoughts are not binary.
I agree.
It's just, unfortunately, we've got to make that binary choice. So, no, I'm really curious to hear about that. And, one of the things that I also see is, kind of the up-and-comers, and what's next. We're going to talk about Kemp, but I've been fortunate to, meet our Attorney General, and I've seen him, up and starting to show his profile a little bit more. So you always kind of wonder, what does that mean as well?
Yeah. Well, look, I think that when you say up-and-comers, I think that there's people that have been bred to be the up-and-comers and people that pop out of the spotlight. I remember Obama, came out of freaking nowhere. It was supposed to be Hillary Clinton, and Obama came out of nowhere, almost a high-talking Chicago congressman. I don't think it's happened in a while. I think right now we have a pretty good idea of who's going to run and who's not. But what you've never had was somebody who had run, previously won, been left, and now is trying to influence and bully people into not running. I think that's what's going to be the most interesting thing. And we covered Kemp a lot in this interview, and shocking to hear what was said.
Well, we'll hear more when we come back from the break, and you've been listening to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3.
Tu familia está construida con tu dedicación a un futuro mejor.
Mira quién es.
¡Papi! Mientras trabajas duro por el éxito de tus hijos, algo que no ves los puede estar afectando. Se llama estrés tóxico y podría estar creciendo dentro de tus hijos. Es la manera en que el cuerpo de los niños responde a las experiencias difíciles, desde las palabras bruscas hasta una pérdida dolorosa. Aprende 4 cosas que puedes hacer para superar el estrés tóxico en first5california.com.
Now back to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3 FM.
Welcome back to the Marketing Madmen. Trip Job and Nick Constantino here. In this segment, we're going to interview Cody Hall, who just happened to be Governor Kemp's communication manager during his last successful campaign. We did this interview with Ben Burnett of The Ben Burnett Show, also on Extra 106.3 in the podcast park, and covered a lot of ground on modern marketing for politicians.
We're going to do a Ben Burnett / Marketing Madmen show. This is going to be fun. All right, Cody, let's get to it. Let's talk about what you're doing now and how much marketing has changed in the modern political landscape.
Now, I kind of run the political stuff for the governor, so we have a leadership committee. We have a couple of other political entities that I kind of coordinate, and then
so I'll say certain things so you don't have to.
Sure.
When he says that, he means marketing efforts that maybe involving federal races or causes that the governor would wish to advocate for in whatever variety he chooses down the road at whatever level of government he would like to dispose of resources at.
Very
That's
eloquently,
pretty good, Ben.
very eloquently said, Mr. Berman. Very eloquently said.
So that, yes. And then in kind of, well, separately from that, a good buddy of mine, Stephen Lawson, who's been on the show, we started talking middle of last year about what we wanted to do after the election cycle was over. So we kind of got together and started Full Focus Communications, which is a comm shop. We do crisis communication, strategic brand marketing, that kind of stuff for issue advocacy, but also corporate folks who interact with media and politics. So that's been fun.
Which is pretty much absolutely everything.
These days, oh my
These
goodness
days, it
gracious.
is a lot. And
you're in
thankfully-
damage control like 24/7. It's damage control.
It's been good for business so far.
And
so.
yeah, that's what I'm most excited to hear about. I mean, look, marketing is part of communications, and that's something we focus on is marketing. I have to imagine from 20 years ago to now, the amount of change that has seen the way these political parties and different groups actually approach marketing. So that's what I'm here about. I'm curious to hear kind of what's changed, what you see the future to be, because I imagine even more change is coming. I remember the biggest light bulb that stuff was changing for me was when you saw, I think it was an Obama ad in like a video game. And like that is something that would have been unheard of 10 years ago, that like there's this big billboard in a video game, and now we're infiltrating video games, man. That's where you don't want politics. So talk about, what that day-to-day is, what that marketing looks like, what that damage control, how that fits with PR. What does that look like, and how has that changed?
Yeah, so I'll give a short anecdote and then hopefully answer the broader question. When we came in, so I was press secretary on the transition in 18 and 19.
For Governor Kemp.
Yes. Our first few days, we had media come into the comms office, which is it's in the bottom floor of the Capitol, and we had a couple of reporters come up and say, "Where are the press releases?" And we looked around. We were like, "What? Like, what are you talking about?" They said, "Oh, well, usually they would print off the press releases that the governor would send out and put them over here on this table." And I said, "We are not printing off press releases anymore. It's this thing called email.
Yeah.
And you will get it in your inbox. If you'd like to be on our press list,
Which means you probably have it on your phone.
please let me know, and we will add you to that." In addition to that, we had a former columnist that is no longer in the media space in Georgia anymore, but this individual, he put out a column that had, we tried to contact the Governor Kemp's office with no response. And I called him. I said, "Hey, man.
You most certainly did not.
You have my cell number." He was like, "Oh, I called the press office line."
Yeah, that's
I was like, "What?"
Gotcha.
It's like, come on, guys. So to answer your question, it has changed a lot just within the last 4 years especially in terms of the governor's office and just generally politics in general in Georgia. It is no longer 2014, 2010.
Were you the Marty, the girls, and I? Is that you?
Sometimes. So I do not have the official Twitter account anymore. But look, the governor and the family, they do this as a family. So it is, when we say Marty, the girls, and I, it is Marty, the girls, and I. So
yeah, it's part of his brand. To be honest, when you look at when you look at, and I'm probably the opposite. Mm-hmm. Like I would, and granted, it's partly because my children are young, and some of the choices that his girls make, they actually make. Like it's consent, and they're like, "Yeah, Dad, whatever." Like mine are like, "What is it? What are you talking about?" So it's definitely. I have a lot of respect for him for how he has leveraged that sort of family dynamic, because even I know Marty, the girls, and I've never met him.
Yeah. So I think, going back to when they first, it was a conscious decision by the family, even during the Secretary of State days back before he was governor, but especially as they ramped up for that campaign.
It just less people read them.
Right. So when they were ramping up for that campaign, I'm 99% sure, because I know the folks that did this, that whenever you're running and introducing yourself to an electorate, you're going to be outspent. You're not the most known name on the ballot.
No, and he had lost a statewide race.
Correct. And you knew that there was going to be a lot of money spent against you, making you out to be someone you are not. Therefore, on day one, you have to present yourself.
Establish who you are.
Establish who you are as a family man, a small a businessman, a
Relatability.
conservative.
You're trying to establish a rapport, a connection.
And you have to do that from day one, especially if you know you're going to be outgunned, outmatched in money and manpower. That kind
it has
of
to be
stuff.
authentic, though, I have to imagine, because that's a hard thing to fake. The longer that goes on, the harder that is to fake, and then that's the character I think he is.
And I can vouch for the fact that it's authentic, because every bus tour, the first lady, even some of the daughters are always on the bus. They're always there. Yes, it was a good branding move, but it's also authentic. Which
he's like a hype man with rappers.
Something like that. Something like that.
You said that, not me.
Yeah, something like that.
He'll appreciate that.
There you go. But I think to your broader question of how things have changed.
Yeah, please.
I think if you look at what we did in the 22 race, we did a lot of things even different than we did in the 2018 race. Because to her credit, Abrams in the 2018 race invested millions upon millions of dollars in a coordinated get-out-the-vote effort
the
ground.
A ground game, yeah.
That no campaign had ever done in our state. Now, you used to have the state party. You had, your Americans for Prosperity. You would have your Faith and Freedom Coalition. They would organize volunteers to go out and do this, 3 weeks before Election Day. What Abrams did in 18 that really revolutionized how campaigns are run in Georgia is she said, no, we are going to spend millions of dollars out of our campaign to pay people to go do this, not October through Election Day.
Straight through.
But start in the summer, contact voters early, make sure they're registered. Once they're registered, then you have another 2 or 3 touch points before voting even starts. So that darn near got her a win in 2018. So what we recognized early on is, number one, we're going to have the resources to compete with her if she runs again, which is why the governor started fundraising in 2019, right after the election win. And then as 2021, late 2020 came around, we said, okay, we've got to have the resources to invest in a similar effort. And that's what we did. I mean, we spent over $4 million on paid door knockers in the primary and in the general that went and turned people out. You had a whole data team that looked at, are these low propensity Republican voters? Are they persuadables? And so we were able to reach those folks early on in the general election and make sure that they turned out to the polls. And I think
that's all.
It worked out.
How sophisticated are you tracking? Like that $4 million was X more effective than $4 million if we spent it on radio. Are you tracking that far, or is it more the data that goes into making those decisions?
Essentially, what you do is a campaign, or in our case, our leadership committee, which is essentially a separate entity.
You want me to define it for you?
Yes, it goes.
That can raise unlimited funds as long as it's disclosed, and then spend unlimited funds as long as they're disclosed. So, out of the leadership committee,
that's a new law.
Correct.
New-ish.
Yep.
In the state of Georgia.
It was passed in 2021.
No coincidence.
Timing's everything in politics. So, in what we were able to do is you go to a vendor and you say, and you have a whole team. Actually, it was more than one vendor, but multiple vendors that say, we have modeled the electorate. Here are these number of voters that we think you need to win. You can win over. And here's what you will have to do through TV, mail, digital, phones, doors to reach those folks. So then you go and you get, a door vendor and you say, hey, man, we've got to reach these number of voters in this geographic area. How much is it going to cost us to do that? Then they, come back to you and say, you've got to have X number of door knockers over Y period of time to go and reach those goals. So that's what we did.
So that's almost predictive analytics. You're trying to use previous sets of data to predict and make behavior changes in the current state of what's going on. And now's the time where you're looking backwards to recap for the next run. Whether it be Governor Kemp or someone else, you're looking forward to how to use that data to model the next run.
Right. And I think one of the advantages we had by doing that in-house was that every week we would get a report that these door knockers, when they interacted with voters, they would have a certain list of questions, a certain list of feedback that they would then take, input into the system, and we could tell how effective we were where they were knocking that week.
Yeah.
And so we can make real-time decisions on, okay, we've done enough on persuasion voters, those voters in the middle. Now we need to move to turning out low propensity, mid propensity Republican
based on the
voters.
modeling.
Correct.
And you have a big enough sample size where the data is accurate enough within a margin of error to make that data worthwhile, and you see results from that data.
That's right.
Very cool. Makes sense.
One of the things, so I live in Alpharetta, and I know the data of that city as well as anybody. Mm-hmm. And I saw on election day that Herschel Walker lost every precinct in the city limits of Alpharetta east of 400, and Brian Kemp won 4 of them. And I told Tug Cowart, who hosts the Morning Extra here, it's over. And he was like, well, what do you mean? There's 5 weeks. I was like, no. I was like, when you didn't take it on when Herschel Walker didn't take it on election day, it was over because there's nobody to carry him. And Governor Kemp did all the right things and lent the apparatus that he had built to go. I said, it won't matter. You're not changing those minds because it's probably a 48% Republican. They're do the right thing people. Right. 48% Republican, 52% Democrat on that side of Georgia 400 in Alpharetta. And I was like, when you see Brian Kemp hang up numbers in a place that's blue or purple, and Herschel Walker still really, really blue in all the same areas, it's like nothing else matters, man. The density that is predicated in your urban centers,
for sure,
your Milton County voter, it's over.
That's where the influence is in this town right now.
And they sat here for weeks, and I was like, guys, I mean, I'm going to let you watch.
Yeah.
I'm right. And then they were mad at me.
That's marketing, man. I mean, like you said, Kemp put that time into building that story of who he was, and that story carried. He was relatable to multiple people. He had economic wins to go on, and I think that message resonated, and I think that's that marketing campaign. It's hard to fake who a person is in marketing.
And he was very supportive of opening the schools as early as you possibly could, and that was the issue to moms who stayed home with kids because they were sick of them.
Yeah.
Look, it is remarkable. So he usually wakes up around 5 a.m. and it has gotten a little less, but not quite. I mean, he
wakes up at 5:15 now and sleeps in.
Yeah, so I still have between 2 and 4 emails from him by the time like 6:30 rolls around of stuff that he's read that he wants us to look at, that he wants feedback on, and that's just who he is. He whenever, as a comms person in the official office, when I would send around a press release for approval, 9 times out of 10, the first person to text me back was the governor. Wow. When I had 12 staff members on that text. Wow. Just because he
was the one that wasn't hung over.
He's relentless. I mean, like he just at times it was like, as a staff member, the standard is set by the boss, and that is a tough standard to meet in terms of work ethic and willingness to get up and go get them every day.
Yeah, what's the motivation? I mean, that to do something like that, you have to be motivated, committed to a cause, or you just got to be the kind of person that thrives on that. And I'm curious, from what you've seen, what's the motivation, and how does that lead the next 4 years?
So I think it goes back a little bit to what I said earlier about that he's always been underestimated. He thrives off of that.
Yeah.
I mean, he does. Like I have seen him in very tough situations having to make incredibly tough decisions. I've seen him completely do the opposite of what I told him I thought he should do.
Because he knows how to act off his gut. And
right.
Whether it's the right or wrong decision, you just got to go with it at some point.
And I'll kind of tell
when you're around him because he trusts you, even though it's not going to be 100% of the time.
Right. So during COVID, there was a conference room that we were all in the early days of it, which, looking back, it was like that probably was not the best
That's
way
right.
to do this.
We came to this office every single day during it. We'll be fine.
Right.
We were all
fine.
So
there was about 12 of us in this conference room, and he would sit at the end of the table, and we were talking about the reopening choice. And I remember saying, Governor, I think we need to wait. I don't think being the first one to do this is the right move. And he just looked at me and said, Cody, they're going to lose everything.
Yeah.
And he said, we're going. So, I mean, and it wasn't just me. I mean, there were other people in the room that were like, Governor, we need to wait. We need to think about this because it could be damaging. Yeah. Well, what if this goes wrong?
Is that moxie? Is that confidence? I mean, to make that decision, or
it goes back to the fact that he is the most accessible person I know. Because when he said they're going to lose everything, he was referring to a lady
he knew
that called him, who was a hairdresser, who she was about to not be able to afford her car payment.
Wow.
There were small business guys that would pick up the phone and call him and be like, "Look, there were teachers that would call him and say, I know kids that we're about to lose because if they're not in my classroom, they're getting recruited by a gang."
Wow.
So, I mean, and he's not lying when he says that's who he was listening to. He wasn't listening to me. He wasn't listening to folks that, think they know a lot about all this stuff. He was listening to real people and it really, we tell the story because it's authentic. He knew that what they were going through was very similar to what he was going through as a construction guy in the Great Recession.
Yeah.
That they would sit around the table on Friday nights and figure out how they were going to pay their suppliers the next day.
Yep.
And he knew what that feeling felt like you were going to lose it all.
Wow.
And I think he understood something that I definitely did not, was that even though it was a tough decision, it was not going to be an easy one. It may not always look like the best decision. It was the right one.
Yeah.
So
We when I sat on it doesn't matter what he goes to do. He could be president of the United States. Nothing, I say this, and Governor, I hope I'm right. Like, if you happen to be the president of the United States down the road, there will be no period of time, in all likelihood, that will feel like COVID. And it was I sat on the city council with you knock on
That's me knocking on wood.
you knock on wood, but you sit there and you have those like shelter in place calls on city council meetings and county commissions because they came to them before it really went to him.
Sure.
And he stiff-armed that, and I didn't think he was right to stiff-arm it because it was a holistic conversation. I would tell him that to his face. And he left it to where if Johns Creek is closed entirely and Alpharetta is open, or vice versa, like, dude, you're not solving a problem. It's the same. They're just going to go somewhere else. And to me, and I say that as like a local control absolutist being like, dude, where are you? But it was, I'll tell you, like, when I looked at like stepping away from it, that was really the thing where I was like, I don't like how much power I have. And I think he is very much the same way. Because, dude, I got a 950 on my SAT score. Like, what on, like, I am a long way from one of the smarter people who should be taking the ability to be like, you can't go to work today.
right.
And I mean that. Like, I was like, golly. And they were like, I was grateful for the support around me because that was, as an elected official, and I would bet he would say the same thing, you had to lead. It was depressing.
Yeah.
It was isolating and depressing, and you knew that because those people were going to lose everything to that point. And I was grateful that he came behind us by like a day or so and like did what he did statewide. And but I'll tell you, like, you don't get to unlive it.
Yeah.
And I give him a mountain of credit. Like, the day he knew that thing, the question I'd have for you guys about that as the comms person, because we got data from the Georgia Department of Health and we got data from the Fulton County Health Department, and they would largely, it wasn't like partisan. Like, it would look like it was a dumpster fire.
It doesn't have enough time to be partisan. You're getting direct information. It's very hard to take real information and all of a sudden.
Where did you guys get data from beyond the Department of Health as the communications guy? Because I feel like you had to know things we didn't know, but probably I venture to guess that's just a liberty I feel like you guys had that you
probably
didn't
wasn't
have.
much. I mean, DPH was giving us the data. I mean, we had multiple academic institutions that would model based on that data, and would send us, hey, here's our model.
Yeah, but margin for error on that data, who knows? This is an unprecedented time.
I mean, to your point, there was in the early days there was a dashboard. I think it was the University of Washington was putting out that literally the White House was putting out. Everyone was off of. At one point, it said that we were going to have 30,000 dead by the end of 2020, and we weren't at a third of that by the end of 2020. And based on that data is why we did the shelter-in-place order so that we could build up the hospital supplies and the bed capacity. Nobody knew.
Yeah. Nobody knew.
Right. And so that is what I felt like was so difficult about that period of time. It was a lot of gut reactions over like, how do you deal with this?
And there was a doctor at Emory.
Oh yeah, I remember Del Rio,
and I did
Dr.
too.
Del Rio,
and to like, I don't say like to the detriment. It was shameful if the guy had more information available and he had an axe to grind or an agenda, because you've got people like me that are 950 SAT scores. Like, dude, I mean, I don't know who I can count on because I know 0 people in my entire life who know anything about infectious diseases.
Yep.
And that's isolating.
My axe to grind with those folks was that I understand that through a pandemic, a once-in-a-generation pandemic, information and advice and guidance is going to change. But then don't speak with absolute authority.
Absolutely.
In every step of the way. When, if you look back,
that's
March
not
of 21, what they were saying in March of 2020, it was wildly different.
Yeah.
But the problem I had was that whenever we were making decisions based on the uncertainty of what we were getting in through data, these experts were weighing in saying, that is absolutely categorically wrong.
Unbelievable.
And I don't believe that they had hindsight's 2020. They were the ones that were really wrong.
And they certainly never came on stage and said I was wrong. That certainly never happened.
And to the point, I want to kind of shift gears with you, because you look at the 2024 cycle from a marketing perspective and all that, and I am going to 100% ask you what Brian Kemp wants to do with all of his federal assets.
Now back to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3 FM.
Welcome back to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3. It's Trip Job and Nick Constantino. Nick, that was really fascinating.
Yeah, it was the first time I got to do something like that, and I really enjoyed it. I think Cody was great. I think he was very honest with questions. I think that Ben did a good job of leading it, and Ben has that experience on the local council level that he knows the different forms of government, which is not something that I'm really. We talked marketing, we talked Kemp, we talked a lot about Trump, which was interesting to hear how quickly the tides have turned and what people think now. So I'm glad the listeners got to hear that. I think hopefully we do more collaborations with other shows and stuff like that, because I think it just opens a completely different set of parameters.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not going to start running for city council now, are you?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Now that being said, one of the things when my daughter was born, I decided to pretty much pull myself off social media and not leave a trace legacy of hers, because man, if they looked back at my old social media pictures, I ain't running for anything, man. I mean, there's just no chance I would vote for myself. So there's no way I'm going to run for it. But I think politics is going to change a little bit. I think let's kind of talk about that here. Is just one of the things that Cody talked about was the ground game, and I think, and again, I go back to Obama. He was the first one to really implement that street level ground game. I think Stacey Abrams did a good job. I saw her people everywhere. I kind of live in town. I just think that she was facing an uphill battle, and she didn't have strategic policies and things she was talking about. She was talking more hypothetical, 30,000 foot, where Kemp was giving $500 back to everyone in the state. I mean, how are you going to win that game? But I think they know for the next round and to get Georgia back to being red, it's going to require more of a ground attack to really amplify those marketing messages. So I think that's where you're going to see. I think you're going to see a lot more money spent on hiring people and ground game and not necessarily working on volunteers. If it is a volunteer, 20 volunteers will report up to one kind of general that will organize the area. I think that's going to be one of the big trends.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is missing, you see some of the community meetings and things like that, but what I've seen is, those things I think can work, to your point in the ground game, but they can't work if they're in the last 2 weeks before the election. I think because it takes time. It takes that message to build. It's the community meeting on top of the community meeting, and I think it has to start 3, 4, 5 months in advance and to really build, that community support.
Yes, I agree with that. And I think one of the things also, the primaries have gotten so much more heated than they ever were. And you almost spend, how much time and effort are you spent on the primary? What do you have left by the time you get into the actual campaign? I think that's one of the problems that you remember Biden was out. He had no chance, and all of a sudden gets South Carolina, and he rallies back and wins the whole country. So it is hard to plan in advance, and you have to plan for so many contingencies that you almost outplan yourself. So I think you have to have a deliberate game. I think you have to put a lot of effort and time into strategy. And look, it's not that unlike marketing. Like marketing in general, there's so many forms of marketing out there, and so many people hitting
contingency plans.
Yeah,
and I think that's
and strategy is more important than ever. And I've never thought of myself as a strategy guy. But if you are not clear and deliberate in a strategy and you're trying to go impromptu, it's going to catch up to you at some point.
Yeah, and I think one of the takeaways for any business is, what are your contingency plans, and when do you pull, and when do you have to go a different direction?
Yeah.
And I think the political campaigns probably, it's more critical, if they have to shift 45 degrees or something. There's a point they know they've got to make that shift.
Yeah, but they can't let people know, because then you affect the party negatively. I mean, that's where that was the Herschel debate. Is by the time you got into the runoff, everyone's like, I don't even want to touch this. But you don't want to negatively affect the party, so you have to go and put those. That's why you saw Kemp campaigning with him. That was not because he wanted Herschel. He distanced himself from Trump in that. That was because to be the right thing for the party and to get those conservative voters, that's what he needed to do. So again, there's just so much more that goes into it. Now, I will say, I would bet connected TV is going to be a bigger interplay in all of this.
Yep.
You know, we saw the program ads being placed. We saw this station having ads for Stacey Abrams, which is just insane.
Yep.
I don't know even why they tried. But I think that's going to keep going, just like general marketing. But I think you're going to get to an inflection point where the money is just so much is being spent that it will be pared back a little bit. You know, whether it be the state decides that it's not purple anymore and it's really red, and then why are you attacking? Whether it be another state pops up out of the woodwork that, you know, at some point, I hate to say it, but Texas is going to have to be purple at some point.
Yeah.
Those big cities, Houston, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, are too big and too blue for that state to not have a fight one day. And what's more valuable, Georgia or Texas? So these are all things that are going to influence how much money is being spent on a local level, for sure.
Yeah, you'll be curious. I wonder if any states will get to a point, or if they try to institute, if they even could, you know, you cannot run political ads until X number of days before a primary or an election.
Fine, you just run super PAC ads.
Yeah.
That's a freaking problem. And who has to approve it is the senators who benefit the most by being in power for unlimited terms. So there's no chance.
Yeah.
There's no chance it'll happen. And unfortunately, you know, let me throw my 2 cents in, because I'm going to do it. I'm not. I am not a fan of either political party. I am a libertarian at its core. I realize the flaw in that, because most people need to be told what to do. But my personal opinion is get rid of term limits for senators and congressmen and add a third party to this country, and we will have another 200 years of prosperity. If we keep going down the path we are now, something weird's going to happen, and not as far off as we think it is.
Yeah.
That was fast enough to not be a rant. That's just my personal 2 cents. But that affects marketing too, because I think people see a trend of, when are we going to start preaching unity? And that's got to be the next turning point, because we're dividing very far apart.
Preaching unity, and then the other end, and I'm more of a facts-based person, but you know, tell me what your principles are. Tell me what you run on.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, things that you think are important, and not you know, you can't do everything. We realize that.
You can't please everybody, because everything you say now is going to piss off a different member or faction of your party.
So, I mean, to me, I'm pray because I'm a marketing guy, I'm a messaging guy. What's important? What are you going to run on? And that's you know, but that doesn't work for a lot of people.
Clear, concise, and clear. You don't need to complicate it.
Yeah.
Right? Jobs, economy, clear things that everyone shares.
And not that I'm a cleaner candidate or less volatile candidate, or I'm not even go into a lot of the terms we all saw.
And those are negative words too.
Yeah.
Even saying volatility hurts you, because you're bringing things into people's minds that you don't need to be bringing. What's important? We know what's important. We know what's important for people. That's never going to change. What the priorities for individual people are, that will never change.
Yeah. Well, it's been interesting talking about politics and marketing. Hopefully, we don't have to do this one too often, but you know, it is something that's, you know, affecting our day-to-day lives, and we'll continue to do that for you know, I think years to come. So. Any other thoughts, Nick, as far as what else the future may hold?
Yeah, I think you're going to have a point where, like I said, where this is just going to start going backwards. We can't keep spending this much money on these campaigns. I don't know if it's going to be the government intervening on themselves. I don't know if it's going to be someone peels back the onion and really starts seeing this dark money, because it is a pretty, it's so spoken about now that it's not even dark anymore. It's just accepted. I don't know if it's the corporations are going to continue their path of getting more involved in how they pick fights. But something's going to happen. They can't keep going on this trend where every Senate campaign is the most expensive Senate campaign ever to run. You
know, something to ask Ben maybe at some point. I don't know if this would work. I don't know if legally you can do it. I would love to see a candidate come out and say, hey, the first $5 million that we raise, we're actually not going to put that into advertising. We're going to put that into rebuilding parks in this part of the city.
Yeah.
I mean, and literally say we're going to take this money and we're not going to advertise, and we're going to do something good.
The DNC or the RNC would shut that down so freaking fast. They would never. That candidate would be blackballed. They would never allow it to happen. You can't win without the backing of the RNC or the DNC.
But what better way to do good for the community you're in?
Yeah, I love your harmless. I love your harmless implication that politicians are out to do good. But yes, true, but they're. And I think we haven't had that kind of leader in a long time. Yeah. That charismatic, reach out to both sides leader that can really do something like that. He's out there. She's out there. I don't know where that person is.
It's Nick Constantino, folks.
No chance. But yeah, but that leader's somewhere, I think.
All right. Well, hey, fascinating talk. Again, hopefully we won't have to do this one too often, but it's been fun. Thanks, Nick. And you've been listening to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3.
This morning in North Carolina, wheels are spinning. Determination is winning. A passion is now a thriving business, and it shows no signs of slowing down. How? The power of a conversation, like the one Clint Spiegel had with First Horizon Bank about starting a bike wheel manufacturing facility in Asheville. Now it's not just talk, it's rubber meets road. First Horizon Bank. Let's find a way. Go to firsthorizon.com/Clint. First Horizon Bank, member FDIC.